And joining us now on This Is the Day is Stanley Williams. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Now, there's so much to get to. Maybe if you could just start off maybe in taking us through a little bit of maybe from the time you got out of college and what sort of drew you into media communications and how that progressed into where you are now.
Wow. Well, let's see, I'll try to do that in 30 seconds. In college, I always had an interest in physics, and so I went to an evangelical Christian college called Greenville College in Southern Illinois, fabulous little liberal arts school, and I majored in physics, but I actually spent more time on the floor above the physics lab in the radio station, and I got just hooked on radio production. And after that, I got into photography after school and stuff like that. And ended up right out of college, I ended up training astronauts at NASA. And my particular expertise was in television and radio and all that sort of stuff in terms of what was being used on the Skylab space station that we had. And I just really got enamored with media. And so when the job went away at NASA, I found myself at the Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan. And I became, over a period of years, I grew into a position of producing and directing films for the Ford Motor Company, and then I had my own company of doing major productions, television, films, and multimedia stuff for all the big three automobile makers. But always in my heart, because of my evangelical upbringing, I had this desire to be, I suppose, an evangelist. I have missionaries and preachers in both sides of my family back generations. Right. And so that was just kind of, I think, in my DNA that I wanted to do something evangelical. Little by little, about 11 years ago, I came into the Catholic Church, and not kicking and screaming. I came running when I discovered the truth of Catholicism, and that's a whole other story. But rather than, I was on my way to Hollywood. I just finished a book that was published in Hollywood, and I was on my way out to Hollywood to work on films. And I said, you know, before I go to Hollywood, I really need to do a documentary about Catholicism. I really need to do something about, you know, the truth I find here. So I started doing Catholic documentaries and Catholic programs, and people started bringing projects to me. And so that's how I've kind of, I go to Hollywood now and then, but I'm really, you know, out of Michigan doing Catholic productions and Catholic evangelism and apologetics, and we have a distribution company called Nineveh's Crossing.
And part of that, too, I know you're involved in a lot of different aspects of Catholic television, but one of the things that we were going to touch on today is a DVD that's called Common Ground, and it's a great sort of dialogue between Catholics and Protestants.
Yeah, it's really quite an amazing thing. This is not something I produced. I wish I had. But we had, when we were Protestant, we attended this church north of Detroit occasionally called Kensington Community. And I had a wonderful minister. It's one of these big, you know, churches that just attract people from all sorts of other denominations. And when I became Catholic, we became friends with a priest by the name of Father John Ricardo. And one day at a men's conference, I was shooting a documentary on Alex Jones, another well-known Catholic figure. And Father Ricardo drew me aside and he said, hey, do you hear what's going on up at Kensington? They did this interview with me. Well, we went up to Kensington and found out that they had going a dialogue with Father Ricardo's church for a couple years at that point, where evidently a number of people at the Kensington church, this community, were about half of them were ex-Catholics, and they were bashing the Catholic Church. And the pastor at the evangelical church said, guys, you're not being very charitable toward your Catholic brothers and sisters, and you're not being accurate. And so within Kensington, they started to teach their people what Catholics really believed. And they became so popular, they said, you know, we better get a Catholic involved here, you know. So they go down the street where Father Ricardo was at St. Anastasia, and he comes up, and they end up having dialogues and meetings and all sorts of dialogue between these two churches, just incredible. And in the process of all that, they shoot an interview, an hour-and-a-half interview, that turns into a DVD that it's called Common Ground, What Catholics and Protestants Can Learn from Each Other. And it's kind of a misnomer. It's really about what Protestants don't understand about Catholicism. And Steve Andrews, the pastor, is interviewing Father Ricardo in this interview, and he's just very open. Ricardo's incredibly good at explaining the faith. And at Kensington, in their bookstore, after churches, the first 2 months this DVD got done, they sold 2,000 copies. We were there, we bought one of those 2,000 copies. We heard about this. I got the rights to distribute it. And now, about a year and a half later, we've sold over 5,000 copies of those, and we think a great majority of those are to Protestants, just by airing them on television programs, and people are just eating it up. It's an incredible dialogue.
That's great. We're running out of a little time, but maybe just, if you could, I just want to talk to you. You're involved in so much with television and film producing and documentaries, but talk about the faith, Catholic faith in television, in films, and how important it is to be done well. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that we have 30 seconds. It's not going to catch that, Kevin. I really think that if people, we're in a media age where people are used to seeing very engaging television. And I think if people are going to take Catholicism seriously, they've got to look at television production or films or whatever we do in media as just really being excellent in terms of technique, in terms of production quality. They're just going to look at anything else as just not coming up. And if Catholicism holds the truth of the world and of the universe and all of reality, then I think our production has to be up to that level as well.
Well, there's so much to talk about, and I understand we're probably going to have you back a little later to talk about another book that you've done, The Moral Premise, which is a popular book from what I understand, and a way of teaching as well. And we'll be able to talk to you in a future episode. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it.
And please, let's continue with the rest of This Is the Day.